This is my 14.3 session plan, session and program review. So my client aims. My client aims are going to be specific to my client as they will be using activities that they really need to work on to improve their overall speed. So we'll use tests to check for success. Tests used for speed will be different distance sprints such as 30 meter, 40 meter and 100 meter sprints. We'll do these at the beginning of the program, the middle of the program and the end. We will also check to see, because in some session we will be improving power, such as the session we'll be doing in this week. So for that we will sort of do a jump height test. This will improve power in the quads and check to see for success. So for the 30 meter, we want this to improve by about 0.3 seconds, 40 meter 0.4 seconds, the 100 meter by 0.7 seconds, and we'd like the jump height to improve by 5 centimeters. These are over the course of the whole program, so these are very realistic and achievable. Here you can see my basic risk assessment form, where I identified some risks there are in the sports hall where I will be taking place my session. Here you can see the par Q. I got my client to make sure he signed and fill in before our session. Here are my client's resting heart rate, resting blood pressure, peak flow result, and BMI, and these are comparable to the average. So my client George is around the average on all of these. He's in between all of them and is close to peak blood flow. This tells us that George does have a healthy lifestyle and has a good diet, which is always good. So for my session, I had to gather some information. So we need to find out a bit about fitness and skill level. So as you can see, I've written that George does have a good skill level. So he does have a good technique for sprinting. However, it could be improved on. His main flaw in his sprinting is the power in his legs. So if we can improve this, then we can really build up the speed. George can sprint at a fast pace. However, this can definitely be improved. So as I said before, his technique can be improved and also the power, which will help to improve his speed. The power we will work on during the session will allow him to sprint at a faster pace. So if we can build up the power, then he'll be able to push off from the ground, driving his knees his knees up, and will really be able to pick up some more faster pace. Medical information. So George has recently had a concussion playing rugby, which has stopped him from exercising the past weeks. However, George made sure with his doctor that it was all okay for him to come and do a session with me, which was very good, and I'm pleased that he can do it. George doesn't have any particular needs, however, I do obviously need to be aware of some activities that might hurt his head as he's got a concussion. Probably sensible to keep a bottle of water on him as well if he's got concussions. He might get a headache or something, so stay hydrated. So it's just little things like that. Nothing in particular though that you need to be wary about. So the facilities and resources. So the location of my session will be in the sports hall. I will need the whole sports hall as we will be sprinting the next hall. If it comes to it, then we can obviously shorten the sprint and or just use like small sections. The equipment I need, so rugby ball, cones, a bench to jump onto, and 2 kettlebells. However, if there's only one kettlebell, it does not really matter. Health and safety considerations. So before I do my session, I must make sure I've completed a risk assessment. This will help to make sure that my client is in no harm when performing any activities. I also need to make sure my client is wearing correct clothing, because some clothing may be inappropriate. You can't get free movement in, or it's not very durable, so it might rip, or it might be expensive clothing that you don't really want to risk getting broken or ruined exercising. So during the session, I will also be checking technique to correct any aspects of George's sprint technique or different exercise we're doing to improve that technique. This will just help to prevent injury. It will also make sure George gets the most from his session, because if you're doing like a squat and you're really not doing it very well, then you're not really going to get anything from it. It's just going to be a waste of time. So you need the right technique to make sure that the right muscles are contracting. At the end of the session, I'll of course make sure all my equipment is put away. Do this correctly. We won't just chuck it in the cupboard. We'll put it away in the right position it's meant to be, and this will prevent any trip hazards or anyone falling on equipment. So yeah, emergency procedures. So if there was an unexpected event such as a fire, we would follow the fire procedures and walk out the fire exit to the tennis court. Obviously, if George was to sustain a serious injury, then I would have to call the first aid and they would assess George to see if he is able to carry on the training or if he does need to stop and go to hospital. If I didn't have the space I needed to run my session, which of course could happen, then I'll either need to do some alternative activities which I've got planned, or the same activities on a smaller scale. So instead of sprinting the length of the sports hall, we'll just have to do smaller sprints. So if I have a smaller or a larger class, then I will still be able to run the session. However, I might have to do the session at a higher pace, as sort of explaining all the activities to each person will take quite a while. So I may have to set up maybe a circuit so the clients can get straight into activity and take one explanation, and then I can go around correcting technique. So issues arising from risk assessment. What I really need to be cautious of is any litter or equipment left out in the hall. Again, I've said be careful of left out equipment, as this can get in the way and it can be a trip hazard. Some litter, such as say a crisp packet, if you don't see and stand on it, could be slippery on the smooth sports hall floor. So we do need to be wary of this. Okay, so warm up. When I first meet my client, I'll have to introduce myself. I'll give them a quick run through of the session, however I won't go into much detail, as some people might find this quite scary, and if you're saying we're going to be doing loads of sprints, it might not sound very appealing. However, when you get into it, it is good fun. One thing I must do is check that George is not injured. If he is injured, then of course I'll have to adapt the session for him and use some alternative activities. So for our actual warm-up, we will need a high-level warm-up, so we can work at a high level during the session. So for this warm-up, this will be a fast jog around the edge of the hall, and then 5-10 meter sprints with a walking back rest in between. So for the 5 sprints, sprint 10 meters, walk back 10 meters, and then sprint again. So repeating this 5 times. It's only 10 meters, so it shouldn't tire George out too much. But before we get onto the sprints, we will have done some dynamic stretches. So as it says here, dynamic stretches are a better option, as they don't reduce power output from muscles like static stretches do. So the sort of dynamic stretches we'll be doing is lunges, kick throughs, open the gate and close the gate. Of course, we'll also stretch out our upper body and our neck. So our neck will be tilting it to the side, rolling our neck around. Our upper body will be doing swinging our arms up and down to stretch out our shoulders. This will all help to release George's muscles, so he really can sprint as fast as he can. Okay, so moving on to our main content. So our first session will be a 50-meter interval training sprint. So this will consist of 50-meter sprints with a rest in between. The rest will be the walk of the 50 meters. So we'll start at one end, sprint to the other end, walk back slowly. As soon as we get to the other end, we'll sprint up again. We'll repeat this 5 or 6 times, depending on how well George is feeling and if he's fully fit. So for this session, I'll only need 2 cones. It won't take long to set up. However, I will need to measure up 50 meters, but I can do this prior to the activity, so I know where to place my cones. To demonstrate this, I'll simply explain the activity, and if needed, I will talk George through the activity first, with me walking through it. While my client is taking part, I'll give them corrections while they are walking back to the start, as it will not off-put them while they're actually sprinting, unless it is something major which they need to improve on. As I said, my client will do 5 or 6 reps. Alternatives for this activity, so to make it harder, instead of doing a 50-meter sprint, we do a sprint all the way to the other end, and then a 70% effort, about 16 on the Borg scale, will run back to the other side. So the rest will be lower, the rest will be the actual 16 jog on the Borg scale, and then we'll give a 10-second rest at the other end. So this will really up the pace. And to make it easier, we will shorten the distance, and we won't work at a higher level, so we'll work at a lower intensity, about 16 on the Borg scale again. So this will make it a bit easier, and it won't really tire George out. So for our second activity, we'll be moving on to some squats, which will be weighted with a kettlebell. So what we will want to do is hold the kettlebell with our elbows hitting our quads every time we come down, our back up straight. The kettlebell will weigh 10 kilograms, however, if this is too heavy for our client, we can get another kettlebell. So I might take a couple with me, just in case. However, I believe 10 kilograms is fine for George. So this drill will not take any time to set up, it will literally just be me hand demonstrating, which I'll do through an actual demonstration of me physically doing a squat. I'll give my client corrections as we work through the exercise, and we will do 8 reps of 3 sets. This will make the activity harder, as it will really burn our quadriceps, and there are a lot of reps. So alternatives to this exercise, obviously we can bring the weight down, we can bring the reps down. That would both make it easier. If it's still too hard, then we can get rid of the weight altogether and just do normal standing squats. If we want to make it harder, increase the reps, and we can increase the weight. So moving on to our next activity, which is leaps. So a leap is basically when you start in a squat position and you leap up in the air as hard as you can from the squat position. As George is training for rugby, we can then introduce catching a rugby ball, but that will be for an alternative activity. So for this activity, I will need possibly a rugby ball, depending on how easy or hard George is finding that activity. I don't have to set up any other equipment other than that. So the key coaching points are to drive your heels into the ground and drive up, launching yourself in the air. I'll demonstrate this to George. While George is taking part in the actual activity, I'll look for corrections to his technique and give him the advice as he's taking part in the activity. The drill can be progressive with reps and introducing the rugby ball, so this will make it harder introducing the rugby ball, as he's not only focusing on leaping up in the air, he's focusing on catching the rugby ball as well. So I'll be throwing the rugby ball as well. Okay, so to make it easier, what we'll do is instead of jumping, we'll have one foot on a bench, and George will just leap up off the bench, keeping his foot that is placed on the bench still on the bench, so he's not actually leaping, he's just driving up, bringing his other knee up into the sky. So this will have 40-second sets, and we'll do 3 of these. So again, if George needs the rugby ball, then we can introduce that as a harder alternative exercise. And an easier alternative exercise is obviously the one-legged driving our knees up off the bench. Okay, so moving on to our next activity is sideways shuttles.